Hey, it's Joel Mark Witt and Antonia Dodge coming to you from beautiful Pennsylvania. We're outside our studio slash house recording some videos, a short series of videos about relationships and personality types in relationships. Your personality, your partner's personality, some of the principles that can impact the intimacy, maybe some of the conflict or tension points you have. And our goal is for you to understand yourself and your partner so well that you can build that intimate, connected relationship that is so powerful to be in relationship with.
So in this video, we're going to talk about what we call battles from the 10-year-old position. You know, if you are unfamiliar with cognitive functions, and this is the first video in this series that you're watching, our recommendation is that you go to personalityhacker.com and in the search field, look up car model. It will explain what cognitive functions are and sort of our take on how to understand them and how the wiring of your mind influences basically everything about your personality type. So those of you that are familiar with cognitive functions, and in particular the car model, we're going to talk about the 10-year-old function, or what is technically called the tertiary cognitive function. Now, this is famous usually because it is associated with a phenomenon called looping, which is when your dominant or driver function and your 10-year-old or tertiary function get in cahoots with each other, and they start to create a feedback loop where they effectively hear only what they want to hear in order to be able to defend itself or themselves from feedback that is uncomfortable. So we talk a lot about looping. If you want to go check out our podcast on the loop for every type, we recommend doing that because it gets into each specific personality type's loops and what it looks like. But for the purposes of this short video, we're just going to reference the 10-year-old as our defensive position. It is the part of us that, much like a 10-year-old, will come to the aid of an adult that they don't really quite understand their reasoning, maybe, a parent that they just feel defensive over, even if the parent is in the wrong. And so what ends up happening in relationships is that when we start to get in a fight, we oftentimes fight dirty from the position of the 10-year-old cognitive function. Our 10-year-old cognitive function, you want to just use us as an example?
Sure.
All right, so I'm an ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system, and Joel's an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system. My 10-year-old cognitive function is extroverted feeling, or what we at PH call harmony, whereas Joel's is extroverted thinking, or what we call effectiveness. And we find ourselves oftentimes in our arguments fighting from the position of extroverted feeling and extroverted thinking. I get rather aggressively emotional and have a tendency to get real angry and to try to emotionally bully him by using aggressive expression. Whereas
It's
Joel,
explosive.
it can be explosive at times,
yeah.
right? And what do you do with your extroverted thinking or effectiveness, do you think?
I tend to get cold and calculating and very digital and focused on getting, like, almost shutting off my emotions, because it's that extroverted thinking part, right? It's the effectiveness. It wants to accomplish something. So it gets very goal oriented, trying to get, it's the whole classic, okay, you got a problem, you're expressing your emotion, let's solve this type framework that I go into for my 10-year-old process. And sometimes it can be behaving badly and can get angry that things aren't happening and try to force something to happen, force this conversation to have resolution, or force an aspect of the conflict that's happening, like force resolution quickly.
When we were younger, not in a relationship with each other, because fortunately we've always kind of called each other on our BS. But when we were younger, I know that I used my harmony process quite manipulatively, and I believe that that was probably also the case for you.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges that you have to look out for in your 10-year-old or tertiary function is watching how it influences your behavior to become manipulative. Now, each personality type has a different 10-year-old function, and so how that manifests will be unique to you. But in arguments, one of the best things you can do is have heightened awareness about what is the style that you're going to in arguments. Because the defensive position is not intended to build intimacy. It's intended to defend the ego. And when the ego feels attacked, particularly from a spouse or a loved one, it can double down and give no quarter to the other person. It has to be right. And so in your battles, are you battling from the 10-year-old? And in what way? Are you using a sensing function? Are you an intuitive, but your 10-year-old is a sensing function? And so now you're seeing the other person or the spouse in your relationship as having no common sense and that they're just being an idiot. Or are you a sensor and you go to an intuitive 10-year-old and so you have the sense that you just know what's going on. Like you just know what's happening and you project maybe ill intent or even behavior that you can't actually verify. Are you a feeler and like Joel, go to a thinking 10-year-old function and get uncharacteristically cold and maybe very driven to to get an outcome, or just simply emotionally shut off from the other person and maybe kind of slam a door on them? Or are you a thinker like me and you go to a feeling 10-year-old function and start to become sort of emotionally manipulative or aggressive, or maybe just rest into your emotion of pride, or sort of emotionally see the other person as forcing you into a feeling that you don't like, and so therefore don't take responsibility for your part of the argument. There's lots of different ways that we can fight from the 10-year-old, but knowing what your 10-year-old cognitive function is, or your tertiary function, and seeing how you fight dirty from it can be the first step in reversing the process. Going from a defensive position, and instead of being defensive, instead figuring out ways to build intimacy from that 10-year-old.
I hear a chainsaw in the background.
I do too.
So
it's Pennsylvania.
The one thing about the 10-year-old process too is just like a real 10-year-old. Imagine yourself back as 10 years old on the playground outside your elementary school or your secondary, your school, basically. I don't know what they're called overseas. I was trying to think of the name. I just know what they're called here in the U.S., elementary school. So you're 10 years old and you're out playing, and it's not all bad. Oftentimes, this is the part of us that's the fun part. It's the 10-year-old part of us, right? This is where we have playfulness. And Antonia did mention that this isn't really part of us that's focused on intimacy building necessarily, or it's not really necessarily knows how to handle intimacy, just like a 10-year-old wouldn't. But it can have an aspect of us. It can be a part of us, I should say, that allows us to build some intimacy and playfulness with the other person, the partner in a relationship. So it's not all bad news. Often this will manifest itself as a defensive part of you and push back, and this can be the conflict piece. Often I even see couples, us too, it's almost like the 10-year-olds have relationships with each other. Like the little part of their personality has like this little side relationship with each other. And it's really interesting to see. And sometimes that can be intimate and playful, and oftentimes it can have conflict and difficulty or friction or tension there. Because again, 10-year-olds are unpredictable. When you were 10, sometimes on the playground somebody said something to you, and all of a sudden you were offended. Your adult self would be horrified at how you behaved maybe on a playground years ago when you were younger. It was just the maturity level that you were at the time. And so just give yourself some space for that, understand it about yourself and the other person you're in relationship with. Hey, it doesn't mean their character is flawed. It just means that they're probably accessing that part of themselves right now, and they feel defensive and they feel like they've got to push back. That's probably where the conflict is coming from. And the other point is just having this language in your relationship, just being aware of if Antonia is in a high emotional state, just being able to be aware and say, oh, that's probably her harmony, extroverted feeling process that's flaring up right now, and we can have language for it, and we can even articulate that to each other. Hey, I'm sorry I just behaved that way. I think it was my extroverted thinking, effectiveness. It sounds weird to do, right, in a relationship, but it's so powerful to be able to have language for the parts of us that express themselves, especially when we're in a moment of such conflict we can't really see straight. We're blinded by the conflict, or we're blinded by the tension, or something like this. So this is very powerful to have this kind of language. And I would recommend that you head over to Personality Hacker. By the way, do you feel complete on anything else you wanted to say about the 10-year-old before we conclude?
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing, or two little things.
Sure.
The first one is one of the reasons why the 10-year-old can contribute to intimacy in a positive way, not just through conflict, is that the 10-year-old part of us is not as touched by cynicism as the adult parts of us. And so that's one of the reasons why it's also a little raw, because it doesn't see it coming, right?
Idealism.
Yeah, it has a little bit of idealism that lives there. And so what's nice about the 10-year-old or tertiary function is that if you can go there to intimacy build and to remove the cynicism that you have of projecting ill intent, then that's why it can be a really beautiful place and not just a place of bullying.
Yeah.
And the second thing I was going to say is if you do choose to use the language of the 10-year-old function in your fights, make sure you're using it in an ownership responsibility way. Hey, I think this is my harmony coming out, or this is my effectiveness coming out, as opposed to a weapon against each other to go, oh, you're just using your effectiveness, or you're just using your harmony. If you use it as a weapon, it actually exacerbates the situation and makes it even worse. So the nice thing about having this language is the ability to own what's happening and express it or explain it to the other person in a way that makes sense to them, so that you can actually take responsibility and increase your awareness around how it's working, and then try to do better next time.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's a key point, is not to weaponize any of this stuff.
Right.
And often I found more value. I have gotten to a place where sometimes I can, in the midst of conflict, call out what's happening for me. But it's very good for post-processing, post-gaming, when everybody's emotions calm down or the conflict has been neutralized. And then later on, you're, okay, what happened there? Let's talk about what's going on for you. And the language can be helpful to reconcile the differences you had during the conflict. It would take some sophistication, I think, for most people to be able to use it in the midst of conflict, because we're sometimes blinded by what's happening. So that would be, I think that's a great point to that. And that's just some advice when you're using this. So I'll go back to say, if you want to know more about how you're wired and your partner's wired, at personalityhacker.com, we have all 16 types with information about them. The CAR model and the cognitive functions we talk about all the time, and how to grow yourself. There's tons of free resources there on the website. Videos, articles, tons of podcasts recorded about all these different topics that I think would be very beneficial for you and the partner that you're in a relationship with. So head over to personalityhacker.com, get access to some of that content and material, and then leave some comments and let us know what you think. Share your stories below in the comments here under this video, and we will talk with you on the next video talking about relationships.